I'm Elise Stewart, and today I'll be talking about society's stigma surrounding police brutality. I'm sure we can all recall a time where we've asked a little kid what they want to be when they grow up. And typically, you'll receive the same range of answers. If you ask a little boy, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? He might say, well, I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a firefighter. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a police officer. Or if you say, hey bud, what do you want to be for Halloween? He might say, I want to be Spider-Man. I want to be Superman. I want to be a police officer. Why is that? It's because they're heroes. They are brave and strong, and they risk their lives to protect people. But here's the problem. The children of today's society respect and appreciate law enforcement officers more than today's teens and adults do. If you turn on the news on any given day, there's likely going to be a story about police brutality allegations, or police being harassed while in uniform, even police officers being targeted and killed. This is not how men and women who risk their lives every single day for us should be treated. This is not how anyone should be treated. And something needs to be done about it. Without these police officers, the communities that we know and love will become chaotic and dangerous. So, due to a growing stigma concerning police brutality, our society has witnessed a rapid decline of respect for governmental authority, specifically in law enforcement officers. Americans, through negative generalizations, demonize and target those that uphold citizens' constitutional and civil rights, as well as their safety. And they do this regardless of whether or not they receive the proper appreciation, recognition, and respect. So, in order to sustain and provide well-run communities, we as citizens must do our part to improve our relationships with these law enforcement officers who risk their lives to keep us safe. Over the course of my speech, I will begin by briefly addressing society's impact on the safety of cops. Second, I will address the negative effects of rioting by giving an example of something that happened in our own community of Cincinnati. Next, I will discuss my personal connection to the law enforcement community as I recall my interview with my dad, Sergeant Todd Stewart, and his patrol officer and family friend, Brandon Taylor. Lastly, I will discuss how we as Christians can better support our police officers, and finish by addressing society as a whole with a call to action. Over the past 11 years, innocent police officers have had their lives unjustifiably ripped away from them. According to public FBI records, between 2009 and 2018, 510 police officers have been feloniously killed while on duty. This does not include assaults against police officers that have resulted in injury. These statistics highlight the unsettling reality of just how many officers are wrongfully and intentionally murdered while doing their jobs. Keep in mind that this statistic only shows on-duty intentional police officer deaths. It does not include those officers who may have been injured during a murder attempt or ones who have been killed off-duty. And believe me, they exist too. According to statistics reported to the FBI, 106 law enforcement officers were killed in line-of-duty incidents in 2018. Of these, 55 officers died as a result of felonious acts. That is, in just a span of one short year, 55 men and women who sacrifice themselves for the very people who take their lives from them. If communities do not step up and do their part in bettering relationships with law enforcement officers, these numbers will only continue to rise. Men and women entering into the law enforcement occupation know that this job does not promise them a safe and easy career. It doesn't even guarantee that they will come home at the end of their shift. They risk everything, every day, every minute of every shift. For example, there's no such thing as going on a 15-minute break when you're a cop. Your guard must be up at all times, prepared for the worst. For example, Tommy Lahren, a popular Fox News commentator and law enforcement supporter, talks about two officers who were ambushed in their cars while they were eating. They were eating, and yet they were ambushed and shot and killed, leaving behind families, friends, and loved ones. Full of frustration, Lahren claims that the war on cops is real. It's sick, and it's underreported. Similarly, the International Journal of Police Science and Management successfully communicates the utter atrocity of the intentional killing of police officers, saying that although the killing of any human being is a horrendous crime, the killing of a police officer is particularly heinous. This is because police officers are viewed as protectors. They are viewed as protectors of citizens' safety and their constitutional and civil rights. When police officers are killed, the public experience a deep sense of insecurity and fear because the public depend on police for their safety and security. Now, I would like to clarify that I am not in any way trying to say that a police officer's life holds more value than the next person. However, I think we can all agree that The intentional decision to kill someone who spends their life protecting you creates a different level of disrespect, a different level of uncertainty, and a different level of pure wickedness. Now, I believe that any civil society must have the enforcement of laws and disciplinary actions for refusal to follow these laws, because they are instituted to protect citizens. Every community needs police officers, because they are the first ones called when somebody needs help. Without this, without the protection of people and the enforcement of laws, our society would spin into complete and utter uncivilized chaos. Furthermore, society is quick to judge and criticize officers on how they carry out their governmental duties, when in reality, the majority of cops are faithfully doing the very job to the best of their ability and are undeserving of such harsh and insensitive criticism. For example, one of the foundational aspects of this profession is learning to read human behavior. Yet anti-police advocates typically jump on an opportunity to generalize the rare instance that an officer misreads a situation, usually concerning an African American, and these advocates then fabricate this incident and promote it to make it seem as though the officer intentionally targeted and killed an African American male. Adler Jeffrey S., an American historian journalist, writes, "The American media have crafted a narrative of a black man as a criminal. Thus, any black man running with or without a gun, whether chasing a suspect or catching a bus, is in danger of being shot by a white cop." This statement sadly encompasses the weighty truth of how society today views cops. People with this mindset take the rare instance of a non-committable cop making a non-committable decision and applying it to all law enforcement officers in America. This is not only unfair to the millions of officers who are faithfully carrying out their duties, but is not valid argumentation and cannot justify the demonization of all cops across America. The divide that this lack of respect creates has the potential to grow from a verbalized opinion to a violent and public demonstration, putting not only targeted cops' lives at risk, but also innocent citizens of the community. An example of this is rioting. Rioting is a common anti-police demonstration that citizens resort to when they feel undisciplined police brutality has been committed in their community. However, police brutality is rarely the cause of the violence, deeming this uproarious form of protest malignant and unjustified. In 2001 in Cincinnati, rioters and protesters filled the streets, supposedly seeking justice for the fatal shooting of African-American male Timothy Thomas by white Cincinnati police officer Stephen Roach. One night, Officer Stephen Roach, hearing a radio alert for a fleeing suspect with 14 warrants, joined in pursuit and came abruptly face-to-face with the 19-year-old in a dark alley. When Thomas appeared to reach for his waistband, Roach shot him once in the chest. 3 days later, the community of Over the Rhine was burning. Roach only had seconds to decide whether or not his life was in danger, and Roach ultimately decided that it was, and fired his weapon in an act of self-defense. But how did the community respond to this situation? By rioting. Rioting is simply returning violence with more violence in hopes to end violence. Such actions and demonstrations fail to realize that this effort will not bring about any change, let alone to an end to the problem they are supposedly wanting to address. A problem that they don't fully understand. During these riots, demonstrators in Cincinnati used 15 previous police shootings in an attempt to justify and prove the reality of police brutality in the city of Cincinnati and justify their riotous behaviors. Officer Roach said that he felt the whole weight of what happened in Cincinnati on him. The response of Officer Roach's own city to how he did his job affected him physically, emotionally, and mentally. For what? For doing his job. No officer should feel like the destruction and violence of riots in his own city is their fault when they are only trying to protect it. Roach stated, quote, "I feel like I was portrayed as someone who was careless and acted somewhat recklessly, and because of that this accident happened. And because of this accident, that person had been killed." What these protesters and rioters failed to realize, however, is the root cause of the police use of force: criminal behavior. No one, unless they are in that situation, can understand the magnitude of these circumstances. It is easier for an outsider to say, "He was just running. You didn't have to shoot him. He didn't even have a gun, and yet you shot him anyway." However, when put in that situation, you can only make judgments based on what you know in that exact moment in a matter of seconds. So you remember those 15 different police shootings I was talking about earlier? The ones that they tried to use to prove the reality of police brutality in Cincinnati? Well, besides ignoring the defensive nature of almost all the killings, these apologists never mention that one of the 15 victims that were killed by these police officers dragged an officer, a black officer, to his death in a car. Or that as of May 17th, all 4 of the most recent shootings by police involved black officers. Or that with a death toll of 3 officers over the last 4 years at the time, a Cincinnati cop was 27 times more likely to die at the hands of a black man than a black man was to die at the hands of the Cincinnati police. In fact, the list of 15 police victims shows the depraved nature not of the Cincinnati police, but of its criminals. The unruly demonstrators failed to see the original acts of violence that lead to these police shootings. There's always more to the story than just a white cop shooting a black man. A foundational aspect of the law enforcement profession is keeping citizens safe. This inevitably includes getting dangerous criminals who pose a threat to the community off of the streets. This decline of respect is being witnessed by kids around America. They are witnessing this violence. If this is not fixed, the younger generations are going to see this lack of respect for authority and only reciprocate it in a magnitude amount. This is seen and felt by thousands of police officers across all of America. My dad, Sergeant Todd Stewart, has been a police officer for almost 16 years. And I sat down with him and I talked about the realities of his job and how community relations impact the effectiveness of his job. Because my dad is a police officer and has been since I was a baby, I am personally connected to the law enforcement community, along with my family and millions of other families across America. As I've gotten older, the realities of the dangers of my dad's job have become more evident to me. I have always seen him as a hero, but the older I get and the more society demonizes and targets cops, the more heroic he becomes to me, and the more I understand the necessity for the community's support of law enforcement officers. In today's society, it becomes difficult for observers to know a police officer's perspective and how they feel about the incidents that they deal with on a daily basis as a result of society's disrespect. I not only had the privilege of interviewing my dad, but also his patrol officer, Brandon Taylor, in hopes to better understand the perspective of police officers in our community and how they work to effectively do their jobs. Society today, especially in the media, many cops are accused of using racial profiling. So, as I interviewed my dad, I began by asking him his thoughts on the subject. He explained that he never uses racial profiling. And racial profiling would be him going out and targeting one ethnicity or race to take enforcement action on that he's not doing for other races and ethnicities. However, he does say that he uses criminal profiling, which does not depend on race. He says that typically, people engaged in criminal behavior will display the same criminal indicators, regardless of their race or ethnicity. Our society tends to make assumptions about police officers and how they do their job. Most people will be quick to call an officer racist or accuse them of racial profiling without knowing the entirety of the story. This will only further divide society's relationship with cops. I went on to ask my dad if he's ever been labeled as a racist, to which he replied, more times than I can remember. As the stigma around police brutality has grown, I was interested to see where he thought the decline of respect and rise of rebellion began. And not to my surprise, he blames the media. Media, a beautiful disaster of beautiful things such as misinformation and manipulation. He explained that the very small minority of cops who might have misapplied force or made a bad decision, especially on African Americans, are then promoted and publicized. However, even if that one incident was bad within itself, it does not mean that there's evidence of a widespread, rampant problem across all of policing. I then spoke with Patrol Officer Brandon Taylor about how he viewed police and community relations. He explained the hypocrisy of anti-police advocates, saying that if somebody is intolerant of the police, it is usually obvious from the get-go. But I don't let it affect how I go about my duties. You can't in this job. If you let things like that bother you, it's time to look for a different career, because intolerance is always going to be there, and it doesn't seem like it's going away. But I will say, even people who are intolerant of the police always call the police when they need us. They love us when they need us, and they hate us when they don't. People only hate police when they don't need them. Even people who claim to hate police will be the first to call them when they need help. Now, I know what you're thinking. There are without a doubt racist cops in America. Cops who should not be cops. Cops who purposefully make bad decisions. And to that, I would like to point out that it would be ignorant of me to not address the fact that not every cop is a good one. Not every cop fulfills their duties as they should. Racist cops exist. Cops with the intent to seek out and kill exist. This is because we live in a fallen and sinful world. However, the number of such cops is merely a fraction of the entire police force and does not justify the demonization of every single cop in America. Howard Safir, a former New York City police commissioner and fire commissioner, voices his thoughts on the declining respect for governmental authority. He says, there are 18,000 police departments in the United States. They interact millions of times with the public and make hundreds of thousands of arrests. Very few result in suspect death or injury. We do not have police forces out of control as the media wants us to believe. Now, does that mean that there are not serious incidents of police abuse or misjudgment? Of course there are. And when they take place, we should investigate them thoroughly and prosecute and punish those who committed the wrongdoing. We should not burn down buildings and murder police officers. As former police commissioner, Safir understands that bad cops exist, and I don't know of anyone who would deny this. But he also highlights that killing cops in general is not the way to bring about justice to the bad ones. He then goes on to point out that higher government authorities and people with major platforms and very public voices, such as certain athletes and celebrities, are not supporting the police force as they should. He says that they should not be promoting an anti-cop or fear the cop agenda because it emboldens criminals and it sends a message that every encounter a black man has with an officer is one to be feared. But what happens when a 10-year-old boy sees his favorite athlete promoting an anti-cop agenda? He's most likely going to believe them. But it's not just kids who fall victim to this kind of manipulation. We as a society must not be so quick to believe what these public figures are promoting, but instead research and know the facts ourselves. He highlights that this is one of the root problems in today's society's war on cops. Law enforcement needs the support of higher governmental authorities and needs the support of these public voices in order to effectively uphold the laws and make our communities safe. How do we as Christians view government and do our part to resolve society's war on cops? The answers are right in Scripture. As Christians, we know that God instituted government for a purpose. Government is not a man-made thing. God instituted it as a means to carry out his will, and it was originally intended to be good. Justin Taylor, a pastor and author on the Gospel Coalition, states that human government is not inherently evil. The structures of authority in any particular political system are not per se wicked. All human governmental authority comes ultimately from the hand of God. Government is then used for evil because people are sinful, not because the authority of the ruling party is wicked or should be abolished. We read in Genesis 3 that because Adam sinned, all who are born after the fall are born in sin. Man is sinful, and therefore cannot uphold government as it was originally intended to be. However, government still provides order and stability to society. Despite man's depraved nature, we are all called to respect our governing authorities, as they have been handpicked and placed in a position of power for a reason in accordance with God's perfect will. Romans 13 says, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment." God is the ultimate and most high king. However, in order to govern his people, he implements laws and places people and appoints certain leaders in order to carry out his will. We as Christians are called to respect those who God has appointed. If we all follow this command faithfully and call others to as well, I think we can make a huge difference in how society views police officers and help them to safely and effectively carry out their governmental duties. Now, our government isn't perfect. Our police force isn't perfect. But our police force is not corrupt either. There are men and women every single day putting on that uniform to go out and risk their lives to protect us, and they need our support now more than ever. We as a community must give them that support in order for them to safely, proactively, and overall effectively do their jobs. I concluded my interview with Patrol Officer Brandon Taylor by asking him how he thinks communities can better support their law enforcement officers, and I think it's the perfect way to wrap up today. He says, communities can better support law enforcement by understanding that we are people too. We are fathers, sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, husbands, and wives. And like any profession, there are bad apples, just like bad doctors, bad teachers, bad athletes, etc. But those bad few don't define everyone in this profession. I ask that everyone let me do my job without killing me over it. I just want to go home at the end of the day. Cops are people. They have families, they have friends. Some have husbands, wives, and children. They are sons and daughters just like us. And they're not perfect. So society needs to stop expecting them to be. Society needs to stop demonizing and demeaning these heroic men and women until they've put on that uniform themselves, until they've experienced what police officers have experienced and seen what police officers have seen. Society needs to stop acting like this is an easy job where every decision that has to be made is an easy one. And just because one bad cop made headlines, that there is a rampant murdering problem through the entire police force. Our police officers need our help, or this decline of respect and inclination of rebellion will only continue to make itself increasingly known throughout our communities. So, thank your local police officers for what they do. Support them and acknowledge their humanity. Thank them for standing on that thin blue line that has made our communities as safe and as beautiful as they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Elise.
Thank you.
I have a few questions for you. Do you think that because police officers have been placed in a position of power, that it might make them have a superiority complex?
I think that it could definitely be that for some, but I also think that that's a very small minority. So I think that most of the police officers are being extremely selfless and risking their lives to, of course, protect everyone. So I don't think that every police officer thinks that they are superior or even acts that way. But I think that it can be seen as that from society if there is a lack of respect for them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that media is one of the main reasons that police officers are so looked down upon?
100%, yes. I think that they are portrayed very wrongly in the media. Just like I said, if there's like one negative thing that happens, a lot of times it is then promoted. And then people who may be oblivious to the realities of it won't know that it's not true.
Thank you. Next question is, do you think police departments could better communicate to the public why they believe an officer was justified when one of these incidents occurs? Mm-hmm. Would this help quell the unjust outcry?
Yeah, I didn't really do a lot of research on like specific trials of officers who have been involved in shootings, but yeah, I think communication is definitely key. But I think that citizens also have to understand the pressure and what these situations that these officers find themselves in, which is also a very small minority. But just understanding that you don't really understand until you're in the moment and have to make such harsh decisions in a matter of seconds. But yeah, communication is definitely important.
Thank you. Next question is, what do you think is the motive behind the negative portrayal of police officers in general?
I think the lack of respect for authority. A lot of people just want to be able to do what they want to do, and they don't want to respect governmental authority. So I think that that is a huge part, and especially in the youth who are seeing this as they grow up, they don't want to have to listen to authority. They don't want to have to follow rules. So I think that that definitely plays a part.
Another question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have specific examples of athletes using anti-cop language? I usually see them calling for racial justice, not violence or hate towards law enforcement.
Yeah. I didn't really research any particular athletes, but I think that the racially motivated arguments are then applied to police officers, and usually if there is a shooting, they will say that it was racially motivated most of the time. But no, I didn't really do any concrete research on specific examples of that, no.
Okay, one last question. Do you think that the recruitment of officers is impacted because the media often portrays them in a negative light?
For sure. I think that people are becoming more and more scared to become police officers, and understandably so, because they are portrayed as such people who are in danger of being targeted, and they are not really portrayed as heroes in the media, at least not in all of it. So I think that, I mean, it's not being severely impacted right now, but I think that it's definitely making an impact for sure.
Thank you, Elise.
Thank you.